Winning team fights in Overwatch 2 is ultimately the only thing that matters if you're trying to climb. But every single fight that you take is going to be fundamentally different, so how do you ensure that you are best equipped to win each one? Well, in this video, we're going to break down the different types of fights that you could have in Overwatch and things that you should take note of if you want to succeed. But do me a huge solid and smash that like and subscribe if you enjoy the content, and let's jump right in. Now, the first type of fight we'll talk about is the first fight, which is characterized by teams fighting for the first time in any given round. Now, this is important to distinguish because neither team are going to have either ultimate, and no one is going to be low on resources when you first make contact. Everyone's going to have full shield, all their abilities, all their health. And the most important thing that you can do to give yourself a chance of winning this first fight is gather information. How many times have you died right off the bat to a Widowmaker you didn't know existed? Or you get dove on by a Winston and they kill two people right away and you didn't even really know they had a Winston until he was already on top of you. Try to gather information about what the enemy composition is so that you don't get caught out by something that you don't expect. On top of that, there's something weird that happens in a lot of these first fights on maps like Push or maps like King of the Hill, where there's a lot of neutral space that neither team controls, but it's typically some objective. So we could think of the point, the capture point itself that will unlock after a set amount of time, or the bot where both teams could grab it back and forth. But the trick here that you need to understand about first fight is that these objectives don't matter, and oftentimes they are traps that you and your team want to more or less avoid. Now, that seems kind of weird, right? Capturing these objectives is the goal. Pushing the bot is the goal. Capturing the Koth is the goal. But the thing is, whatever team wins that first fight will be able to easily capture the objective. If you capture the objective and your opponents kill you because you were in a worse position because you prioritized the objective rather than good positioning to win the team fight, you might get 5, 6, 7%. They're going to take it right back. You might push that bot 2 feet and they're going to push it 40 feet. Now, this doesn't mean that you can't utilize these objectives to your advantage, especially if your team benefits from the enemy taking the fight to you, like you're playing a brawl composition or you're playing brawl characters that benefit from them taking the fight to point, hypothetically. Then you can maintain that space on point, denying line of sight, and ultimately either forcing the enemy to come fight you on your terms or drag out the fight, potentially giving your team a ton of free percentage. Now, I do want to move on to talking about fights with control. Now, what do I mean by control? These are fights where you already control the objective, or you are the defender, you control the capture point that enemies are trying to take, and these are fights where enemies have to push into or challenge the space that you and your team already have. And there's going to be a defender's advantage here. And defender's advantage means that you are already set up on your strong positions with your cover, and opponents have to find a way to move or set up in a position that challenges you. So this means like routing to the high ground, hypothetically, as attackers, and as defenders, you are looking to interrupt the setup of the enemy team. Oftentimes, if you allow the enemy team to perfectly set up in the way they want to, you give away a lot of that defender's advantage. So when you have that high ground advantage, when you have your strong positions, don't allow the opponents to route where they want to for free. But another really important thing, though, is that when you start to get a true disadvantage, then you need to give up your space that you control and retake it later. So basically, let's say you're holding defense on an objective with your team and 2 or 3 of you have died. Instead of just fighting and dying right then and there, because you could force that fight and die, you want to give up space, give up objective, give up everything you possibly can, and utilize time so that you and your team can regroup and you can potentially retake that space. You got to understand that while trying to retake a space is hard, it's harder to win in a numbers disadvantage. So we're going to take the lesser of two evils, the easier option here, and we're going to regroup with our team first as much as possible before we challenge them for those key objective points, maybe giving them 2 ticks on an objective or waiting until the last possible second to actually commit to the fight. Now let's talk about retake fights. And these are fights typically when you're trying to retake the space, retake the ground. And this ties in directly to that situation where, let's say, You died, 2 people died, 3 people died, you backed off away from a point, they're about to capture, all of y'all are back, and now you have to re-push in to space that the opponents occupy. How do you do this? How do you actually have success doing this? It's not easy, but it is possible. The first thing that you need to identify is, are there gonna be people that can contest before the opponent's cap? And this is most common in like the 3rd point of a payload, right, on defense. Let's take King's Row the 3rd, right? You're gonna contest, your opponents are all pushing the cart. If you're the person that needs to actually contest the objective, then you need to try to play characters and play to contest the objective. And this is going to really depend on who else is alive, who else can touch. If you're the only person that can touch and you're a support, you better be swapping to a character like Lucio, and you better be playing not to necessarily go for a high risk, high reward play that gets you kills. You want to play to delay for time, buy your teammates time. If you're a DPS, it could be Tracer, or it could be Mei or Reaper. If you're a tank, it could be Wrecking Ball, Winston, or Ryan. The idea here is that your goal, if you are the one that has to contest space, is just to delay the objective and prevent your opponents from winning. But if you have at least one person that can occupy that role, then what you can do is very, very freed up. You can go out and you can look to sustain them and heal them up and keep them alive so that they can stall much longer. You can go for a play where instead of just trying to help your team live, you come out of spawn as a character that is going to actually target the backline sustainers, the supports or the DPS in the backline that are constantly generating value, and you look to cut the source as opposed to just fight the objective. Like for instance, if you're trying to defend and there's a Widowmaker taking unlimited pot shots at your team, unless that Widowmaker is dealt with, your team is all gonna die. Doesn't matter how long you stall for, and that's actually the problem. So in a way to think about it, if the Widowmaker never gets killed, then it's impossible for you to win. Now, you can also come out of spawn as something super high risk, high reward, like a Widowmaker, hypothetically. A character that has the means and capability to turn a fight out of nowhere, and how risky you play and in what role you play during a retake is gonna be dependent on who can contest the objective and what is needed for you to win. Sometimes you have to play for more of a risky play if you need a huge clutch up in order to win, and you're gonna play to that, as opposed to play a way that might delay for a couple of seconds and it's just a slow loss. Like, you're not playing to win, you're playing not to lose, and you're just gonna lose anyways. Of course, this is going to be really different if you only need to stall like 20 or 10 seconds to get to that 0, so that if you get over a minute, they can't even attack. But of course, it's that specific situation, but keep that in mind. And the next thing that we need to talk about is staggered fights. And there's 2 types of staggered fights. There's the type of fight that you're being staggered and the enemies are trying to chase you out and kill you. And there's also the ones where you're staggering the enemy team. So let's say you win and kill some members on the enemy team. You already capped the objective. A staggered fight is you're chasing them down. Oftentimes you're leaving one person on cart, if anybody, and you're going to try to kill every single last person that isn't killed here, or maybe got the forward spawn, and force them to get the much later spawn, and the entire time you're getting more ultimate charge and delaying their inevitable second fight for much longer, which is all in all a good thing. Now, the only thing about a staggered fight that you need to consider is who actually got forward spawn, how many of them did, and you'll know that by when they died comparatively to when you capped the objective, and how many teammates are with you, because the idea is you always need a numbers advantage. If the enemy tank and like 2 supports spawn in and you and another DPS push up alone, you could easily get the tables turned on you, and that is the worst case scenario when staggering a fight, and it can make it so you get staggered back or lose a ton of advantage. And then the opponents can group up and fight much more forward than they would before. So definitely be aware of that, and don't be afraid to leave a staggered fight engagement if you don't see easy kills in front of you. But as a team that is getting staggered, or just in general where you're backing up, let's say that the opponents have won the initial engagement, you're backing up. Oftentimes, if opponents overextend a bit too much and you have a focus fire with like a duo, you can turn the tables on targets really easily. You know, one on a shot into a Cassidy shot into just a person dying out of nowhere can all of a sudden leverage some of this disadvantage. And it's important for you to understand, as someone being staggered, when it's correct for you to run away completely and just get out of there so that you can't get chased down, whether it's correct for you to fight and potentially try to find that disadvantage, or whether it's correct for you to die and just go to the objective, die, force them to clear you so that you get to reset with your team. And these are going to be dependent on a couple of factors, including how many players on the enemy team are alive, what's the risk and reward difference between living and getting staggered versus dying and fighting, and comparing and contrasting all these things. Now, last but certainly not least, let's talk about low resource fights. And this is when you're in a situation where you typically have to clutch up. You've all been there, where it's like a 1v1. Maybe it's even just like a 1v2 or something super small. Everyone has low resources, low health. No one has full ample teammates. Maybe there's no supports. Maybe there's no tanks. And you need to try and do something to clutch up, right? Now, this is often where mechanics meets game sense, because how you play in these situations are going to be very dependent on the information that you have. The thing you need to ask is, what is the win condition for the fight? And let's say if you die, the opponents cap the objective, and if you kill them, the opponents don't, and your team will regroup with you, and y'all will be able to hold. But let's say in the fight, your teammate died first. Your first teammate died first, and they're not back yet, but they will be. In that situation, you could easily turn that 1v1 into a 1v2 just by playing to stall for time. You don't have to go and take a really aggressive 1v1. All you have to do is deny the capture and wait for your teammate to come back with you, and then ultimately clear the objective as a 2v1. This means that time is your ally and survivability is the win condition, as opposed to trying to go for a clutch up. But let's say in the exact opposite situation, you're fighting someone and you see their team coming and your team isn't there to help you yet. Going for a potential high risk, high reward play on the 1v1 can actually help to potentially even out the matchup. This is where you go for something like a one clip on a tracer, or go for a really high risk play where you're dueling a target and you have to hit a lot of shots to win. It's very similar to trying to retake before, where if that Widow just lived, you were going to lose inevitably, and you have to take the risk to try to kill the Widow instead of allowing her to just free shoot over your team. And while your first instinct is to live and survive and make sure that you just don't lose, play to not lose, you actually have to play to win. You actually have to play to win, because playing not to lose will eventually make you lose, because you have a fundamental disadvantage that is creeping up to you, whether that's a teammate regrouping, whether that's an ultimate coming up. And it's really important that you not only try to perform mechanically well in these situations, which of course you would, but think it through. Try to play for the path of least resistance that's going to ensure the victory, rather than betting it all on you making one proactive play when it really wasn't needed. But if you have any questions about these, definitely let me know in the comments down below. But I hope you enjoy the content. Smash the like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.